My husband's a huge.
Recording in progress.
I'm still working.
When I get.
So,
Mine lived till 93, which is the last of my grandparents.
Garden.
And I
Get
finished
involved in
for
any, any.
All right.
City,
She was the
Sorry to
youngest of my grandparents, 23.
Sorry to interrupt. It's 7 o'clock. We'll get going.
Don't let us.
Ah. Are we ready? Are we recording? Okay. All right, we'll call to order the Planning Commission meeting for the City of Oregon City, June 24th, 2024. Ms. Newman, can you call the roll, please?
Commissioner LaSalle,
Here.
Commissioner Laws, here. Commissioner Dole,
Here.
Commissioner Schlagenhofer,
Here.
Commissioner West is excused, Vice Chair Espy,
Here.
Chair Stoll.
Here.
Good evening. I just wanted to make a quick announcement about Commissioner West. She's been granted a leave of absence until September. So she talked to the mayor about that. She had requested a medical leave of absence. She's okay. I've talked to her. She's doing fine. She just needed some extra time. So we're hoping that she recovers and is back in September.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. We'll move on to, it's not on the agenda, but any public comments for items not on the agenda from anybody? No? Okay, good. We'll move on to meeting minutes. Anybody have a chance to review those? Want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of June 10th, 2024.
Second. Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? All right, call the vote, please.
Commissioner LaSalle,
Aye.
Commissioner Dole,
Aye.
Commissioner Schlagenhofer,
Aye.
Commissioner Laws,
Aye.
Vice Chair Espy,
Aye.
Chair Stoll.
Aye. Move on to item 2, presentation about growth assumptions and infrastructure master plans.
Yeah, thank you. I'll give a quick introduction. So this is another topic that came about from your work plan that you identified over the last fall and winter, and the thought was to get a better understanding of how growth is accounted for in some of our infrastructure master plans. So there's a few items in your packet that kind of talk to our infrastructure plans, and then a couple of pieces that came from the middle housing code refinements and the infrastructure that was looked at as part of that. John Lewis, our Public Works Director, and Christina Robinson Gardner, our Senior Planner, have graciously spent some of their beautiful summer evening time with us to go over some of these plans. And so Christina will talk a little bit about the middle housing, and then John will talk more about the infrastructure master planning.
Thank you, Aquila. Chair Stoll, Commissioners, I have one slide. Just want to put that on to John. I have one slide tonight. All right, some of you may have seen this slide if you were here during the House Bill 2001 code amendments, but I thought it was a great slide to talk a little bit about how the city looks at assessing adequate infrastructure. And really, there's two categories. There we go. One is if you were an infill lot. So if you're a single family home or a middle housing project on one lot, infill somewhere in the city. The other would be if you're going through a land use action, a partition or a subdivision. So we review for adequate infrastructure a little bit differently for each. So I'll kind of take you through both. If you are an infill lot, you're an existing lot in the city of Oregon City, either you're building new or adding on to an existing dwelling unit, you are required to hook up to city utilities. No transportation analysis is required, and that is because during the House Bill 2001 analysis, dispersed infill lots were really seen as dispersed enough throughout the city that no individual lot proportionally would be required to do a transportation analysis. Usually those happen when you have more than 10 or 12 units, so those are well below, and they were dispersed throughout the city. So no transportation analysis is required. The city does actually, by code, require proportional upgrades through this type 1 building permit process, and that is 10%. So 10% of your valuation of your project can be can be required by the city for street improvements or utility improvements on your frontage. So let's say you have a curb but no sidewalk, or let's say you have no curb or no sidewalk, or let's say the city needs 2 extra feet of right-of-way. And right-of-way acquisition is not part of that 10%, but that analysis is done at the building permit level and up to 10% of the valuation of a project. Yep.
Is that in addition to SDC charges?
Correct, in addition to SDC. So this would be, oftentimes you'll see that if someone's doing an infill, a new house, or maybe they're doing a duplex now, there's an existing house on the property, and maybe you see sidewalks go up in front of their property. That's part of that 10% valuation exaction that the city can do. So that's kind of dispersed infill, and that's done through the building permit process. We call that a type 1. It's a ministerial, clear and objective. There's really very little discretion. The other path is you are going through a land use review. You are creating new lots, either through partition or subdivision. So partition would be addition of 2 or 3 lots total, and a subdivision is 4 or more. And so with that, that's a type 2 limited land use decision. That's where your notice out to the neighbors within 300 feet and other interested parties. There's a public comment period, a decision made by the community development director that can be appealed by the city decision. Generally use clear and objective standards, but if there is any analysis done, that analysis is done in the staff report. In those applications, let's say I'll take a subdivision, for example. You must hook up and build all the city utilities and streets before that land use application is platted, so the subdivision is platted or partitioned. We look at the worst case transportation analysis required and to determine if there are any on-site or off-site improvements needed based on your impact. And the applicant, in this case, provides the anticipated number of dwelling units. So let's say, for example, I am an applicant who wants to do a 10-lot subdivision. Well, in our zones, there are many variations of the number of dwelling units you could have. You could have 10 lots with a single-family house on each, that's 10 units. Or you could have 10 lots with anticipated fourplex on each, and that would be 40 units. So there's quite a spread between 10 units and 40 units. So really, if you're an applicant and you know how many units you'll be building, let's say you're going to be the developer and the builder. You say, well, I know I'm building 16 units on those 10 lots. And so I'm going to do my analysis based on 16 units. I know I'm going to build that. The transportation analysis is done for 16 units. The sewer water analysis is done for 16 units, and conditions of approval are placed on that. At the time of platting, and then you move into the building permit, if an applicant wants to do more than the number of units they proposed, they will have to do additional analysis. So the approval is based on the number of units you presented in your subdivision application. If you want to do more, additional analysis would be done by the city to see if there's adequate infrastructure. And that's really how we are approaching middle housing, and we really are encouraging applicants, if you know how many dwelling units you want to build that into your analysis. If you don't know, decide what number you want to do. Do you want to do the worst case scenario just in case? Do you want to do less? It's really the applicant proposes the number of dwelling units they want to study based on the range of minimum and maximum. So that's the framework we're at as it relates to how we analyze for infrastructure. Are you an infill lot with kind of the building permit level 10% improvement and hooking up to utilities? Or are you in the limited land use decision where we look at your requirement to build the city streets in your development and your frontage, as well as proportionally any impact you may have on the system, in addition to system and development fees. So before I move on to John's piece, I'm here to answer questions, but that's kind of the framework as John talks about how master plans have been identified through the city with regards to transportation, sewer, water, stormwater. That's how we look in planning how an individual application meets the master plan. You have to tell us how many dwelling units you propose to do. Do you have any questions before I pass on to John?
Yeah, so let's say someone has enough land to build 10 lots, and they say, all we're gonna build is 10 dwelling units. So then they sell them. What's the process for one of those individuals to then try to add an ADU or a couple more duplexes
Sure.
on one of the now existing properties?
Sure. Well, we would put a condition of approval on the subdivision that said, you've proposed 10 units, we've done the analysis on 10 units. If you propose at the building permit level to do more than 10 units, you may have to come back either through a type 1 or type 2 process to show that there's adequate infrastructure. So we would not give that building permit until we saw adequate infrastructure.
Okay, just to make sure I'm getting it right, but that would apply to anyone that buys one of those units even 10 years down the road?
No, this would be, we would not allow a building permit. So let's say, you know, you've proposed 10.
Yeah.
Somewhere down the road, you sell a lot to somebody and they want to build a fourplex. Well, the moment they get to 11, we would not allow a future building permit to be approved until you provided additional information. We would deny the building permit until additional information on infrastructure was.
Okay, so it would be, the onus would be on the individual property owner after that bought one of those lots, because there's not enough infrastructure for more than 10.
Right, and so we really encourage applicants to really determine how many units they want to build at the very upfront, because nobody wants the 11th hour analysis because they didn't think ahead. So we really encourage, you know, to really think about what you want to build when we meet with them at that pre-application conference.
Okay, all right, thank you.
The 10% on the infill one existing lot, so that's just like curbs and sidewalks and that kind of stuff?
Yes, it's any street improvement abutting your property or potential utilities abutting your property.
Yeah, because
But
I'm
it's
thinking of the house
capped
that...
at 10%.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the house that has sewer 50 feet away from it. You're gonna get past that 10% pretty quickly.
Well, you still have to hook up to your, you still have to provide connections. So
Okay.
that's outside of the 10%.
So that's outside that 10%. And
So
then,
your connection could be a lateral, or it could be a little bit of a public line plus a lateral, but that connection piece is separate from proportional street improvement.
yeah, and then any street fixing that you need to do to put that sewer up.
And it's exactly 10%. So if you have a project that's 11%, you might have to work with the city, and maybe it's a project we really want, and if it's on a But there are times where we've said, well, okay, well, we have to go less, but we can't require more. We can't require 11%.
How is the valuation determined?
Here, we use the building valuation through the building department.
And how is that? I'm not at all familiar with that process. Is that like a time of materials, or is that a market?
So I'm not the expert, but
Okay.
I can get back to you, but it's a industry standard valuation.
Okay.
Usually it's square footage of building.
Materials and labor.
And labor, but it's a standard
Gotcha.
understanding of what a calculation of especially related to homes.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any other questions? No, all right, thank you.
Or Slack. Okay, I'll just turn it this way. Can you hear me okay? All right. Well, good evening, Commission Chair Greg Stoll and the rest of the Planning Commission. So tonight, do you have my presentation handy by any chance? I've got more slides. Well, tonight we just want to go over this infrastructure planning at more of the master plan level, because what Christina just acknowledged was really kind of down into the weeds, kind of the types of projects that will come before you. Not that a master plan won't come before you, but for the most part, the kind of development that's coming for is really kind of almost assuming that a lot of the infrastructure is ready and in place. may not be the infrastructure that's adjacent to that, but for the most part, the city's master planning has looked at, full build out within the city. So, so I'm going to go through that. My hope is that even though it's at a high level, it give you a level of comfort that the city is doing a good job with its master planning and planning for future development. But at the end of the day, we can build great plans. We know what needs to be done. Sometimes getting there is a little difficult to do, and especially depending on things like the transportation. The utility plans are a lot more driven by engineering calculations and things like that. Transportation plan has got a lot of community involvement where maybe they want projects that aren't necessarily driven by an engineering formula, for instance, right? So transportation I'm going to spend a little bit more time on because it's my guess that when things come to you or when you hear comments from the community, it's a lot about the transportation system plan, right? Typically people aren't that, they may be concerned, but they're under the assumption that water, sewer, stormwater facilities are going to be well designed. But the transportation system, they see it every day, right? So I'm hoping you have a little bit of comfort with knowing that the city's got some really excellent plans. So in discussions with Aquila and Christina, we talked about kind of what the question was. So there's no quotes around this. It was not something that I better move forward. But this is what I put together based on what I heard from them, so you let me know. But this is the kind of thing that I would expect a planning commissioner to say, which is with all the growth we see underway and the pressure to build even higher densities and the vacant land within the city's urban growth boundary, is the city and other service providers doing enough analysis and planning to determine if infrastructure can meet the demand? That's kind of what I think you're wanting to know, right? You want some certainty in there as you think about these smaller projects that come before you. And I think coming from the Planning Commission, it's a great question to ask, and something that probably should be asked a little more often because there's turnover on the Planning Commission. You're always learning a little bit new, and you're not necessarily immersed in the master planning that has happened because some of it's happened 10, 12 years ago. So I think that is a good question, and I'm assuming that's pretty, well, not more than assuming, I'm pretty certain that was kind of the question that I was asked to come to offer for you. So I think having a presentation like this, getting some more assurance from staff every 5 years is a good thing to have done at the Planning Commission. So while I won't be here to answer that, the next person will, and we can bring that before you, because the world changes, regulations change, expectations change. So, and good examples of that are this House Bill 2001, which establishes new density expectations for cities. We have neighboring water district providers, water and sewer district providers who have changed some of their approach and maybe now can serve more area than what is needed through the Oregon city system, so they can serve it on their own. That's true for Clackamas River water. That's also true for water environment services. So we may have assumed in our original master plan for sewer or for water a certain number of customers that serve, and now we're finding that, well, not only are we planning for that, Clackamas River Water is planning for that, or Water Environment Services is planning for that. So there's some crossover there. I like to think of it as redundancy, but the reality of it is there's a secondary option for water service in some of these areas, or sewer service. So I feel like our master planning, as I talked through it, is very good. But there's also some areas in town where we may say overall the city can serve all the growth potential that's needed there. There may be some pocket areas where maybe we need to focus a little bit more on a wastewater pump station, for instance, or something, or a particular pipeline that needs to be upgraded. And hopefully our master plans will catch that. But there are some things like this increased density thing is definitely, I don't know if you read the report that was attached to the staff report, but it kind of talks about how these plans should always be checking in, right? You should always be looking ahead. And in fact, we'd like to see our master plans happen updated every 10 years. Now, a couple of them are over that, but the idea is that it would be nice to be looking forward, checking in, figuring out where developments happen, how has it gone with regard to what the assumptions were, those kind of things. So, and I guess the other walkaway that I hope you take from this is when we do these master plans, it's critical that the community get involved, and I would say that's especially true for folks that are on the Planning Commission to kind of pay attention to what those plans are all about. And when they're asking for community interest, for instance, if you want a walkable community, do you want it walkable everywhere? And once you see what that cost or what those projects imply in terms of how we're going to fund those things, I think, the one thing that I've learned with our existing transportation system plan is somehow I feel like it's almost an over ask, right? There's way more projects, which I'll show you, than we can afford to build. So how do we reconcile that? And I think that happens at the community level when you're kind of saying, I want that, or I want this, I want a shared use path here, I want a more walkable community, I want larger intersections, those kind of things. When those add up over time, and in our case, we've got a long list of unfunded projects, so I wanted to talk about that. So this is something that just took out of the sanitary sewer master plan. The map is really just, this is from a 2014 plan. So it shows our 3 concept areas in gray. Those are all areas that are intended to grow. And then there's a lot of the color is infill or potential for redevelopment. And this map again was from 2014. But the population and the growth is kind of a theme that I wanted to bring to your attention because I think people forget about this. The current population of Oregon City is 32,755 according to the U.S. Census website for 2012. At full build-out to the current urban growth boundary, the population will grow to approximately 52,500. The service area will grow approximately 1,800 acres of new land inside the current UGB. So, my grandfather told me when I was young, real little, he'd always use this quote when, there's 2 things that are likely to happen or that are guaranteed to happen, taxes and death, right? He'd always tell me this, right? Well, he forgot to tell me that in thriving communities, it's also guaranteed that you're going to see growth. We're going to see a lot of growth in Oregon City. We're going to continue to see it. And I that's an expectation that I think the community doesn't necessarily realize. Oregon City's slated to growth. We're in a metro region. The planning that's gone into our master planning assumes a fair amount of growth in Oregon City. So I thought and we see that same 52,500 in most of our plans. So that's kind of an established population projection for Oregon City that I think is important for you to know. So we have, I mentioned our sewer master plan. We've got a stormwater master plan that was done in 2020. Our water master plan is 2012. We amended it in 2021. And then our transportation system plan was done in 2013, although we also amended it in 2019. So our plans are range in how current they are. Other plans I've listed are, Water Environment Services has a master plan. South Fork Water Board, who supplies Oregon City Water, they have a master plan. We've got specific corridor plans. Obviously, Parks has plans. So those are the kinds of plans that are under Oregon City's kind of governance. And each of these plans, especially the utility plans, but also the transportation plan have a modeling that's done, computerized modeling that for a pipe network, it includes the diameter of the pipe, the slope of the pipe, how deep the pipe is, all those kinds of figures that are figured into this hydraulic model, and then they charge it with inputs, right? How many people are connected to the end of that pipeline and are going to be needing the downstream conveyance system if it's sanitary we're talking about. They consider those concept plans that land use has done to say, well, what kind of densities are going to be, included in that area. So, population for a master plan is very important, but the thing that I think people forget about is population is just one factor. In most cases for utilities, it's really kind of a small element of the use of that system. Sewer, for instance, our biggest problem that we have with sewer, and a lot of the accounting for sewer usage isn't about how many flushes we're going to get. It's got a lot to do with how much those pipelines leak and what the tendency is for those pipelines to take surface water in the form of inflow and subsurface water in the form of infiltration. Because what we really see is we see a pretty steady summer flow, right, that comes. Obviously, Super Bowl Sundays in the wintertime, but events like that where everybody's flushing, we can see those little peaks. But what really happens is in the wet winter season, we have drainage basins in Oregon City that exceed probably 12, 15 times the amount of flow that they would see on a natural summer day. So most sewer systems, for instance, are designed to accommodate flow beyond population use, right? And so I would say when you start getting into a basin that's that wet, that's got 15 times, that's a problem. And that's why we're addressing it right now, right? That's why a lot of our master planning for sewer is focused on these pipelines and these leaky pipelines, and why we're spending so much energy right now into trying to get a handle on what we call infiltration and inflow, or I&I. That's true for sewer. Water, just like sewer, we're accounting for all this population, and it's a little different because we've got irrigation needs, so there's pretty high water demand for water in the summertime. But the biggest kind of concern would be that summer demand, when we're pumping and we're trying to move water through the system, and having a fire situation, an urban fire situation. I'm not talking a house fire, that's manageable, but a real urban fire, something that would threaten the community. Those scenarios are often where most of the demand and most of the sizing for reservoirs and for pipelines and for pump stations is not so much about the population and what they're going to get out of the tap. It's got more to do with the fire flow requirement, or the fire flow requirements for the water system. So again, I'll mention those hot spots. There's definitely areas where we want to do capital improvements. This map, for instance, that's shown on this page, shows a lot of our water system improvements. We're planning a lot of water capital improvements. Within the year, you're going to see construction on Malala Avenue, and we're going to be putting a big old 30-inch pipeline right down the center of Malala Avenue. Why? Because we want to both meet the needs of our current citizens, but we also want to build a facility for future build out of the city. Stormwater, a little different. Stormwater in Oregon City is unique in that we've got 15 different drainage basins, so they're a little bit flashy. So when it rains, they get intense use, and then they stop. But there's not one big drainage system necessarily that all that comes to. Our drainage goes really in almost all directions around Oregon City because we've got this hilltop, so it might go south, it might go east, it might go west, it might go north, depending on where you're at in the city. But we do have a master plan for that. Most of these master plans, for instance, the sanitary, when I started with the city 20 years ago, we had finished a master plan, and it was pretty focused on a lot of work with our pump stations. This last master plan that we did, we focused a lot more on pipelines. That's why you're seeing programs to increase or to seal up pipelines. This next go around, we'll probably go back to our pump stations, and it'll be time again to kind of focus on those. So we do, so that's the wastewater side of things. But we've got pretty aggressive capital plans that come out of these master plans that help us inform us as to where we should be spending the rate dollars that help cover the cost of those improvements. Let's see, transportation. So transportation planning is usually driven by, at least the analysis piece of it is more of a regional modeling effort. So Metro provides a lot of the data with regard to growth in the region, how that's going to happen, growth outside the city, and how that traffic comes through the city, whether it be 213, MALA, 99E, all those big highways for that matter that are coming. So we use that data that Metro produces, and we work with both Kittleson and DKS and Associates, who I think you've heard from many times, to evaluate how that data works, or how those trips work themselves through Oregon City, and what that load of traffic will be in peak hours, right? So you've heard of, AM peak hour, PM peak hour. That's a lot of the kind of consideration that goes into the analysis that happens behind the scene. That's beyond kind of the public involvement or the public input into where they might want a crosswalk or where they might want a pathway. That Metro model helps inform more of the travel demand, right? Where are trips generated? Where are they headed? And how's it going to affect our transportation system? Where do we need more capacity? And sometimes we may want more capacity, but there's nowhere for it to go. So we'll see systems where instead of the option of building more capacity, we'll see more congestion. So I am going to focus the rest of this on the transportation system plan. So maybe I could stop right here. Do you guys have any questions about the utility systems before I move on to transportation?
So there's nothing worse than having us sit up here and act like stormwater experts or any other kind of utility experts, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. Are there any provisions for changing the standards from, I think it's what, a 15-year storm event to anything greater than that in light of climate change and other kinds of storm events that could be increasing in the future?
I do think there's opportunity for that, and we're going to see more of that, Paul. I think, or Commissioner SB, we're going to see more of that because you're right. We're seeing flashier storms. We're seeing microstorms in our communities that can inundate some of the facilities that were built, just a few years ago. So I do think the region will drive that number for us. And, we've changed a lot, right? I mean, if you look at most of Oregon City, there's no stormwater facilities beyond pipelines, right? They quickly gathered it into catch basins and put it in pipes and took it to the river. We've, over the years, have come up with these things called detention facilities, right? Stormwater quality swales. We've gotten a lot better at treating that water where it's kind of generated and holding it back. But I think if we're going to continue to see weather patterns, then yes, we're going to have to adjust that. And I think that's likely to happen in our next stormwater master plan.
I believe it's the Forest Edge apartments that had those serious landslides a few years ago.
Right.
They installed a dewatering system up there. Is that working the way they intended?
Yes, it is. We have, we look at the data every year. They send us a report, and we've actually, between when they installed that and where the groundwater level was, kind of on the uphill side of that, it's dropped tremendously. So yes, it does work.
Yeah, quick question. John, any points on like emergency preparedness or redundancy within like the infrastructure plans? You kind of talked a little bit about fire flow and being able to accommodate, you know, an urban fire event. How much of that is in the plans?
Well, it would be, I would say yes, but at the same time, the ability to build all that redundancy is a challenge. That's where I'm appreciating the fact that we've got a neighboring water provider who's thinking about trying to get water, you know, that would help us in case of an emergency, right? Now, if we had another, God forbid, another fire out in Clackamas County, we're probably all hands on deck, and we're all going to be challenged with that, right? We can't build a system big enough to fight an urban fire like you see in some of these communities that you hear about on the news, right? There's just not enough storage capacity, and we're all man-made reservoir storage. That's what we have here in most of Clackamas County. So, you know, trying to build those, trying to find sites for those is a challenge. Okay. Well, so, you know, as far as transportation system planning goes, you know, all the communities are trying to build the right system to accommodate all these cars and trips. So we're not unique to that, but we did put a lot of work into this when we did the 2013 master plan. If you've looked at other city TSPs, my guess is theirs are fairly similar to this, but I wanted to share these. These are the goals that are in as they're listed in the transportation system plan. So obviously we're about health and safety, and health means walkable communities, right? Trying to make sure folks are not just driving there, but if they are driving there, or if they are, whatever their mode, we want to make sure it's happening in a safe manner. Emphasis on effective and efficient management of systems. So that's back to, is it both cost effective? Is it efficient in how it moves traffic to the degree we can build capacity? Are we building it? And are we doing that in a way that's cost effective? Sustainable transportation systems. Are we using materials, and are we using methods that you know, are sustainable for those transportation systems? Are we trying to get folks through the heart of Oregon City in a timely fashion, or are we holding them up because of lack of capacity? Equitable, balanced, and connected multi-user systems. This, I think, lends itself well to some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion elements. We want to make sure we're spreading the work around all our communities, not just focused on one particular community. I think Portland, we hear a lot about Portland and how they built I-5 through certain corridors and how that displaced people. We don't have that scenario in Oregon City, but you know, we still want to be very equitable with how we distribute our transportation funding. Identify solutions and funding to meet those needs. That talks about rate studies, gas taxes. We've got a pavement maintenance utility fee, all those things. The county passed a vehicle registration fee not too long ago, so that helped fund that. So while I still think there's a much greater need, we've done a pretty good job in Clackamas County and in Oregon City in particular. Convenient and available opportunities for alternate modes of travel. This is again back to, even though we've got a community that's got lots of topography to it, are we still trying to provide ways for folks to get from point A to point B without a car? Supporting our economy. I think that's back to if we are bottlenecked. We heard a lot about that with the proposal for tolls on 205, and what would that do to our economy in Oregon City? You know, everybody was pretty certain, and I think they were right, that would have really been hard for our downtown. So, you know, again, which by the way, our transportation system plan never considered a 205 toll, so we were really seeing some needs there. And then compliant with state and regional plans, which I think is what assumed trans, I think this is one of those things that I've heard people frustrated with, they're just trying to get me out of my car. Well, there's some truth to that, right? Not just because we can't build our way out of all the trip generation that's going to happen in here. So there is going to be more walking, biking, and transit usage, and you're going to see that in our current transportation system plan, and I think you'll see it more in the future. But there's also more driving solutions. So there's more capacity projects in our transportation system, as well as walking, biking, and transit. Expect more congestion. I just don't see a way around that, and I think I used to live on the west side. Don't share that with too many people, but I used to live on the west side, and I mean, there's a big difference if you spend any time over there compared to Clackamas County and Oregon City in particular. So I know those folks are used to a lot more congestion than we are, but it still feels like it, especially if you're somebody who's lived here all your life, that it's definitely changed over time. We're seeing more congestion, and I think we'll see more. Again, just showing you in the blue box, there's some of the assumptions that were made in terms of, in this case, they used households or jobs, but quite a bit more growth than what we have today. So that's where I'm just kind of sharing that we can't build our way out of it, and yet we are still going to see more congestion. This is just a couple of graphics out of the TSP. I think they're kind of interesting. This is how they highlighted where different housing would be expected, and the bigger the dot, the more likelihood there's going to be a lot more development there. The large kind of orange red dot is increase of more than 1,000 households. And then same with the green dot, that's where most of the jobs would be and where they were projecting those. So when they look at kind of trip generation and where folks are coming and going from, they use those kind of large scale numbers and this is how they graphically represented that. I thought that was kind of a cool map. The other one that is harder probably, I don't know what your screens look like, but hopefully you can see this. Just some of those hot spots and where we really anticipate some real congestion and problem areas. I think right now with the development that's happening on Maple Lane and the apartment complexes, we hear a lot about, well, how could they ever let that happen? Well, it is an area that's slated to grow. Yes, there's going to be more trips there. Yes, we know there's going to be challenges with some of those intersections there. We are pretty focused on those areas. So, well, our master plan identifies them. We're doing a separate study to kind of figure out, well, what are some other adjustments that could be made to accommodate some of that growth. But at the end of the day, most of the traffic out there is generated outside of the Oregon City, and we've got very little control over how that growth occurs outside of Oregon City. So we rely on Metro and the county to kind of help us understand what to expect. But at the same time, even when we did this in 2013, we knew that we were going to have congestion problems at some of those key locations.
John, I'd just like to make a statement. Oregon City is a piece of cake as far as congestion is concerned. If you travel to Beaverton or Tigard or I-84 and I-205, any of those areas, we got it really easy here.
Yeah. That's a statement, right, Bob? You're not asking me that, right?
That's a statement.
That's a statement. Yeah,
there's no question in my mind about that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. That's kind of one of those things. But that's not to say that there aren't some hot spots. I always think of like Washington and 15th down there. There's almost no peak hour that you can easily get through that. Luckily, it's only 4 or 5 blocks. But yeah, there's definitely places in Tigard that I've driven on, and it's several miles of bumper to bumper, right, traffic during peak hours. So I do think people are a little spoiled here, and or used to. Maybe not spoiled is the wrong word. Maybe they're just used to a lot less congestion.
I was on Highway 217 for the first time in about a year, a couple of weeks ago. Oh my God. I don't know how people can stand it over there.
Real quick question before you move on. Obviously we drive around Oregon City. There's times that, going down the hill, I have to plan 15 minutes in advance certain times of the day to make sure I get out of Oregon City to get on the freeway. I know Metro controls some of our intersections. On Beaver Creek particularly, there's newer developments there, and some of the lights, obviously, is there something we can do in terms of lights with more congestion? What is the philosophy on that in terms of, traffic lights and intersections? I've noticed recently going through Beaver Creek, literally from the college going across, I sometimes across like Beaver Creek from, anyways, by Sherry's and other things, it's like I'll go through a couple cars and then the light turns already red. So is there a philosophy with that or something to kind of control traffic, or kind of get, what's the philosophy on that, if you have some insight?
Well, so a couple things. Metro isn't necessarily in control of our signals, but we have 3 agencies in Oregon City that are. So, and the state manages the intersection of 213 and Beaver Creek Road, and anything along 213, anything along State Highway is state. That they manage and control the timing of those intersections. The county, we hire the county because they have the expertise in managing traffic signals, and I feel like I know a lot of the technicians that are doing that work, and I think that their philosophy is to try to move as much traffic as they can. But if you're an ODOT traffic signal technician, your emphasis is on moving traffic down the highway and letting traffic build on the side street. And so I think we see some of that at Beaver Creek and 213, whether you're eastbound or westbound, right? But they're also well aware of the peak hour counts. And for that particular intersection, if you're coming from the high school and heading towards Portland, that's the prominent movement, right? So they know enough to keep that light provide as much pass time as they can. But what you're talking about is increased congestion, and there's only so much efficiency that you can get out of a signal controller. Now, our philosophy though has been, so we just completed a project that has signal coordination from 213 on Beaver Creek from 213 all the way to Warner Milne. And so all those signals now are interconnected, and the county, we're working with the county to do a better job with getting those coordinated. But we've got we've got Molalla and we've got Beaver Creek, and then we've got Warner Parrott, trying to get all those signals aligned and timed and not, and then allow for pedestrian traffic to cross. I mean, that's one of the problems that we've seen in terms of, like, when we redid Molalla Avenue, for instance, between Beaver Creek, it's safer, it flows well, but we've also got these mid-block crosswalks for pedestrians to help pedestrian traffic. That steals a lot of the efficiency out of that too, right? So we want more traffic to use Beaver Creek than Molalla because it's a bigger facility. But yes, you're right. The philosophy is to move traffic, but if you're an ODOT, you want to keep that ODOT traffic moving most. This one's really hard to read, and I see it now. When I printed it, it's small too. But this was kind of an interesting graphic that is in the TSP that shows just kind of some of the connectivity that happens, especially in the concept areas of Park Place concept and the Thimble Creek, man, I so want to call it Beaver Creek, but the Thimble Creek concept area, and just kind of how some of those future roads are planned to really kind of connect Holly Lane to Holcomb, or run parallel with Beaver Creek Road out by the high school out there. So they just show a lot of traffic generation arrows and which direction they think they're going to go. And so a lot of those inputs are in that modeling that they do when they run these transportation system plans to find our problem or our hot spots. This is where I really wanted to get. I'm sorry, you didn't give me a time. You didn't tell me how much time I had. Do you think I'm okay? Okay, all right. So when we did the transportation system plan, there was a lot of community involvement, and I think just about everybody that had a want or an ask was given a want or an ask that landed in the transportation system plan. We ended up with 362 transportation solution projects totaling $222 million worth of investment. Now that number is a 2013 number, and I've kind of outlined a lot of what they are, and these little graphics on the screen kind of indicate what they are. My ask for the Planning Commission, Transportation Advisory Commission, we talk about this a little bit too. Pretty much anybody I talk to is, that's a lot of ask, and somehow that's got to be funded. And I'll show you another slide on the next slide that a lot of people think, well, new development's going to pay for all that. Well, new development is going to pay for a lot of that, a very lot of that. Our transportation system charges are high. But a lot of these projects are called for existing development, and we really don't have, we've got gas taxes that keep the lights on, that help keep paving, our signs done, our striping done, our elevator running, those kind of things. And we've got a pavement maintenance fee that covers the cost of paving, and we're doing a pretty good job of keeping up on that. When the county decided to move forward with the vehicle registration fee, that was a shot in the arm that kind of helped us. That was like another $600,000 a year that was kind of helping us to move forward sidewalk projects. We could pair all that together with a grant maybe and build a Malala Avenue, right? Or rebuild a Malala Avenue. And so, but what I'll share with you in the next slide, I think, is some of the challenges. So we do good planning with transportation. Not the planning. I think it's more just how do you fund all these improvements to manage that stuff in a timely way. And so we've got a little bit of gas taxes left over by the time we're done paying to keep the lights on. Our intention is to collect a lot of SDCs. And so there is a question about chicken and egg thing with SDCs. While we've got a nice beginning fund balance, it's probably enough to solve the problems at Beaver Creek in 213. But that's about it, right? But we've got everywhere else. So I think some people would like to see the transportation improvements happen before the development comes, and we're not in that situation. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that's not the situation we're in. I hear of other communities. I was just looking at Bend, for instance. Bend passed a big bond measure, and they're trying to figure out how to get enough staff to deliver all that. Oregon City has not ever done a big bond project like that would build out and use those SDCs or use those gas taxes or those vehicle registration fees to pay those back. I'm an advocate for that kind of thing. I think it's smarter, and it helps those future folks not only pay their SDCs, but they also pay the rates to help buy down those bond payments. So this chart on the left here, or on the right, shows, now I can't even read it, it's too small for me, 123 million in SDC funded projects. And I think the plan, as we've written it, covers about 55% of that. And then on the other side of that, there's around 99 million overall over the entire balance of the transportation system plan that needs to be funded by existing users. And sometimes what we get into is we're collecting SDCs, and it works well if you're funding a facility that's, say, out in Thimble Creek, and it's a brand new facility. That's 100% SDC fundable. But if some of you are familiar with Central Point and Warner Parrott and Leland Road, and well, it's right here, right? This intersection right here. Again, most of that project is not going to be funded by growth. That needs to be funded through existing development. And again, the picture I've tried to paint is we don't have a lot of revenue stream to help cover that match. We've got the SDC piece that could likely cover that, but not the matching number that comes from kind of the existing residents. And nobody's in love with additional fees or charges, but that's kind of where I think it's got to go. It either comes from that or it comes from grants. And we've been pretty successful with grants. So we've got a shortfall. And that's where I think when we do our next TSP, having people like yourselves who understand the community needs and think about the fact that every project that you ask for comes with a price tag, sometimes pretty big. It'd be nice to see a little bit better prioritization than what we ended up with our last TSP. That's the one piece that I think is kind of, there's too big of a gap of unfunded projects in my mind. So I guess, that, to me, the walk away for this presentation was really wanting you to know that we do a real good job planning, and I think we've done a good job balancing that with ISDCs in terms of utilities. We've got our utility rates are not the highest, but they're high as well, but we've got a lot of need in Oregon City. And so, to me, those match. That transportation one's a little different because, in reality, the one fee that we have for that is for pavement. We do pair that with projects. For instance, Malala Avenue is a good example of that, where we rebuilt that. We paired some pavement maintenance dollars with it, but we used it for pavement maintenance, right? So, I see a problem on the horizon as how we can fund our transportation. Really like to have them. That's the missing piece. So I'm happy to answer any questions or not.
Go ahead.
Real quick question. Obviously there's a lot of infill projects already happening on Malala Avenue. In those cases, obviously the sidewalks didn't need to be really improved or, because they were already pretty nice or whatever. How do we get those type of smaller developments to kind of contribute to, since obviously parking's going to be an issue, maybe street trees will need to be improved over time. How do they contribute more into the improvement of Malala Avenue? Because obviously their projects are much smaller, they shouldn't have to pay as much, but then how do we get them to contribute towards Malala Avenue in terms of the sidewalk and improvements? Because the smaller projects don't seem like they can contribute as much, even though they shouldn't have to, be gouged, but how do we get them to contribute more, I guess, more efficiently?
Well, I think the information that Christina was sharing was pretty legitimate. Carrie could probably talk to, I always want more, believe me, and we typically hear, what's the term that I forget all the time?
Roughly proportional?
Yeah, roughly proportional. Yeah, I hate that word, or I hate that. It's like, why can't we ask for more? But, so, again, keep in mind, I don't know if you have, I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but my sense is if you saw the system development charge for that particular, or those developments, you'd be surprised at what they're contributing just in fees. That, by the way, aren't intended or aren't to be spent on staffing, they go straight into a capital fund that puts capital on the ground. We usually require them in an area like Malala if the sidewalk is damaged or needs to be repaired, or if they damage it, definitely if they damage it, needs to be upgraded. And if there's no sidewalks, I think Holmes Lane is a good example of that, right? We're trying to get through Holmes Lane and get the sidewalk along their frontage installed. But you're right, if they're in an existing area, yeah, they might be required to replace a street tree if it's bad. And then there's the 10%.
Yeah, the 10% piece is just for residential, type 1 building permits. So if it's an office use or commercial, there's SDCs assessed, even for an addition.
Well, if there's any agency that's ever done a whole lot with a very little, it's been the city of Oregon City, and I think you guys have done a great job on the transportation master plan. I would just encourage, and I'll always say this every chance I get, to encourage dialogue with the state and TriMet to encourage additional routes that can pick up some of these little far-flung neighborhood pockets, so and create some way of encouraging more people to use those alternative forms, and of course enhancing the bike lanes and bike routes, so that my wife can continue to ride to the library on her bike.
Thank you for mentioning that, Commissioner Espy. So we do have a shuttle service. I'll put a plug in for that, Clackamas County Shuttle Service. Yeah. And I would love to see more ridership on that because, you just never know when the grant funding for that, which is how it's funded, it's a free shuttle. And then transit, TriMet's looking to make some improvements at their transit center as well. And so that'll be a shot in the arm. I think the improvements that they did up at the community college are helpful. Mm-hmm. But yeah, trying to get folks to use those systems requires frequent stops and in kind of the heart of the neighborhood. And that's been a challenge, especially if the ridership in the locations that they have is small. They changed the route recently so that it would be a little shorter for a shorter loop.
I think the people, when I talk alternative transportation or bus or MAX or any of that, anytime I talk to people in my circle, they're worried about public safety. They hear these trumped up things about, stabbings and knifings and, bad people on the bus and all this other kind of stuff. And I think that those are isolated incidences. And all the times that I have ever taken the bus, that's really never happened. I mean, there's been some strange things that happened, but by and large, I don't think it's really as much of a problem as the media would have you believe. So anyway, I just wanted to just applaud and encourage.
Yeah, if you think of all the trips that happen on those facilities that go that are enjoyable trips, and there's just no. It's a safe place to be, I guess, even though the news focuses on those.
I disagree.
Yeah, me too.
I do now.
Every time that TriMet has expanded to a different area or a newer area, their own studies indicate that crime rates have gone up. Those are studies by TriMet. So anyway, can you tell me whether the safe routes to schools and sidewalks on Holcomb Boulevard, if that project is on budget and on time?
It's on budget as far as I know. I haven't checked, but we've been a little bit hampered by the moving of the utility lines.
So have I. Getting out of my.
Hopefully they didn't shut you off, Bob, but. Yeah, just, that's always our challenge, is trying to get design, bid out, and you know, our utilities, we do a really good job with our right-of-way management as well, so we've got good connections there to kind of push that. But they have, by law, they've each got 30 days from the time. So if you start at the top, PG gets their work done, the next one has 30 days, they can move, and the next one has 30 days. And if they truly use all that, we really kind of see some challenges with that. Now, the contractor knew that was coming. We knew that was going to be a little bit of an issue. So they're focusing on key areas. They hope to get they want to make sure they get all the work on the Holcomb School Road side done before school's out. But I think we're about 2 weeks behind, Bob.
Okay, you're retiring in August without my permission. And I'd just like to congratulate you and the Public Works Department as a whole on the wonderful job you've done over the years. Sure, it costs us money, but I think you're spending the money wisely, and thank you so much for your years of service with us.
Bob, it's been a good run. Yeah, it's fun to work with good people too. So I'm anxious about it, to be honest with you, because I've always worked. So I'm trying to figure out what's next.
I think there's at least 1 or 2 spots up here that are going to be open, or that's coming up at the end of the year. So.
Yeah, so I've heard that too.
Yeah, and I was anxious when I retired too. I've heard these horror stories, about how hard it was, but boy, I'll tell you, I just was so smooth into the retirement, you couldn't believe it.
Thank you.
I got something. Okay. One thing that comes up a lot with some of the developments that show up here is it makes me wonder about the coordination between our master plan, our master transportation system plan, and then the county. Like, how much does the county get involved in our plan? How much coordination is there? Because we'll identify a project that will say, this connection is crucial. Like, we've got to have it. I mean, it's just like on the top of our list, and then the county says, no, this one's not on our radar right now. And so the whole thing just kind of dies, because we can't force the county to, work on a county road when it's not in their plan, even though it's, super important for us. So is there any way to get the county to come to the table when we need them? Because sometimes it seems like it's a hurdle that we just can't get over.
Well, I mean, let me start with the county's got some great staff over there that do think about those things. The county is kicking off its transportation system plan update, and Quilla might know a little bit more about the timing of that, because I think she communicates with them a little bit more than that, because I think planners are driving that project, the transportation system plan update. But I might not serve on this one, but I'm already told Dana, my city engineer, that give me the timeline, because I might want to be a citizen advocate on that particular transportation system plan. And I think hearing from planning commissioners, city commissioners, you're right. There's the city limit line, and the city is by law probably, we're obligated to plan for everything within our city limits. But corridors that are state or county facilities, you take Maple Lane, for instance, or Holcomb Boulevard, or Redland Road, Redland is all still county until you get to state. But, those are just feeders that come into our system, and we don't have a lot of control over land use outside the city. And the county collects funding from people inside the city as well, right? So I don't disagree with you, Dirk. I think it's kind of a balance. I don't think there's going to be a huge swing and look at that, but I think that there's a potential to have some influence over that, over how much they could participate. But their problem is they don't have a mechanism for collecting revenue from like an SDC, from folks inside the city, at least not that we, I don't care, else.
No, I think that the part of the problem is that the county doesn't plan for county roads inside the city. Right? The city plans for roads, county roads inside the city, ultimately. So the city ends up funding county roads, and the primary users of these county roads are county residents. So we need to figure out some kind of mechanism for county residents to help pay for the share of the county road that's in the city. So I'm not exactly sure what that mechanism will look like, but there is a way to do that through an intergovernmental agreement, and I think we're hoping that we can have those conversations as the TSP project in the county moves forward.
That'd be good. Thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments? No? All right. Thank you for coming in, and congratulations on your upcoming retirement. Thank you for all your help, all your work.
Thank you both.
All right, we'll move on to item 3, Park Place Concept Plan Code Refinement.
Thank you, Chair Stoll and Commissioners. So we're continuing on with the work session on the clear and objective standards adoption for the Park Place Concept Plan. We've had a couple of these meetings already. We are almost getting to the point where after this meeting, we'll have maybe 1 or 2 more meetings that are also work sessions to look at open space standards and some of those requirements. Last week, we started discussion of the medium density residential zone and the residential design standards for Park Place. Let's see. And the point of these amendments is to make sure that we're implementing the 11 key elements that were identified as critical to the concept plan. Tonight, this is looking like the previous meeting PowerPoint, because
Yeah, we didn't make it through the whole thing last time. We timed out.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, we have a new presentation for tonight that picks up where we left off.
Yeah.
Oh, gotcha, okay.
There you go. Go to public meetings, the 24th, and that one. Thanks. Sure. Great. Thank you. Let's see if this works. Okay, there we go. And, okay, so we started to look at the residential design standards, and I'm going to go back over some of your comments from from the previous. And tonight we're going to dive into the neighborhood commercial zone district requirements and a brief set of revisions for the master plan and plan unit developments chapter. And again, these are implementing the key elements of the concept plan. We are still anticipating staying on track for legislative process to start in the summer or fall, hopefully. Last week, here are the comments that we heard on the residential design standards. I just tried to summarize what we heard. So when we were covering the roof design section, we heard that flat roofs may or may not fit in the concept plan. There was concern that we should allow other roof types than pitched roofs. We also heard that accessory structure roof picks should match the house, but we're hearing, different opinions on this, and that's fine. We're still debating it. On the solar access piece, where it was mandating a certain orientation and roof style to accommodate solar access, there was pretty strong consensus to take that section out entirely. The secondary massing requirement, there was a good suggestion from you all to also allow porches or deck areas to qualify as a secondary massing element in addition to a cross gable type thing. So we're going to look at writing code to allow more options there. On the porch and entry requirement, we talked through the requirement to have a 24-inch raised porch, and there was consensus not to require that. There was also consensus not to require railings and defer to the building code for when railings would be required, which is when they get to 30 inches. That was the other piece. And as far as approved siding materials, you would like to add flexibility to allow both horizontal and vertical types, including what are known in the industry as panels, vertical shingles, board and batten siding. So we're going to need to come up with some new definitions to implement these as well. And so the last part of 1721 that we didn't get to is the new section on housing diversity standards. And the purpose and intent statement of this is to require that a certain amount of the housing built in a land development be middle housing based on the acreage of the development. We looked at a lot of different codes, Salem, Wilsonville, Milwaukee, and they all vary widely. Some of these housing diversity standards apply to general development plans or discretionary reviews. What we're proposing for Park Place is to have a clear and objective standard. And as you know, and what we've discussed, all of these clear and objective standards do allow for modification through a land use process. So while we're writing a clear and objective standard, there is a way for an applicant to see that standard ahead of time and apply for a modification through a land use process where public comment and notice is provided. So the housing diversity standard is in one chart based off of net developable acreage, which is a term that's defined in our code. For 0 to 2 acres, you would only have to build one housing type, and that could be single-family detached. From 2 to 10 acres, at least 15% of your housing type has to be a middle housing type. And that allows the developer, rather than the city dictating which middle housing type to build, we would leave that up to the developer. In all of these cases with middle housing, they have a set of standards associated with how they look and how they're constructed. From 2 to 10 acres, 15%, 10 to 30 acres, 20%, and 30 or more acres, 25% would need to be middle housing. And that means duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, townhouses, and cottage clusters. And that would be implementing the Park Place Concept Plan key element for a mix of housing types and ranges of affordability. And we think that this gets at the right balance between requiring a certain type of housing in order to have that diversity that the Park Place Concept Plan requires, and allowing the market to still adjust for those housing types.
Pete, at what point would that percentage be determined or proven by the developer? Would that be in the application stage, or when?
Well, it would be, the first review would occur at the land division stage, and then we would attach a condition of approval, and then track the number of lots as it's going through the building permit process, make sure that the standard is there. There's going to be some implementation aspects of this that we need to work our way through. Once the unit types are built, we'll have a permanent record of that, but it doesn't preclude somebody coming in later on and proposing some other type of housing unit after it's built. We currently have a similar requirement in the master plan chapter 1765. So it says once you get over a certain size of development, 25% of your units had to be some other type. And for example, the Sears Farm development, they proposed duplexes on the corner lots. And then during the process of development review, middle housing got passed. So they're still required to do 25% of a different housing type, but they can get to choose whether it's duplexes, triplexes, or whatever. Yeah, so there's a way to do that at the time of building permit. And that would be the revisions for the residential design standards, and we're going to be talking about the neighborhood commercial zone district. So the NC zone was created to implement small-scale mixed-use nodes within the concept plan areas, not just Park Place, but also Beaver Creek Road and South End. The NC zone is implemented through rezoning at the time of annexation. And so all these areas that are future NC zoned areas are currently shown as mixed-use corridor on our comprehensive plan, which is the long-range plan. The Park Place plan anticipates that development of these nodes will become commercially viable only when there is sufficient housing within the immediate vicinity, and there are also other constraints. And I'm going to talk about the handout that you received this evening, because this is not something that was in your packet, but we're handing it out tonight. We're going to put it in the next meeting packet as well. And I'm going to just brush on some of the main points of this of this report that's before you. So we'll discuss some of the conclusions from that report later on. As far as the code amendments for neighborhood commercial, I'm going to start with the permitted uses section. The current permitted uses are any uses permitted in the mixed-use corridor. That's not changing. The maximum footprint for a standalone building, commercial building, cannot exceed 10,000 square feet. A grocery store cannot exceed 40,000 square feet. Live-work dwellings are allowed, and outdoor sales that are ancillary to permitted uses. And then the additional uses that are permitted under section 060, which I'm going to go into in a little bit. So this is providing a cross-reference to the reader for those additional uses in that section of code. And the purpose of this is to implement the key element for neighborhood-oriented commercial nodes that integrate commercial, residential, and public open space. Under the conditional use section, so this is a discussion where we're going to need to talk through what the NC zone land amount is. Currently in the concept plan, there's approximately 12 acres, gross acres of mixed-use land. The development that we went through review, Park Place Crossing, has about 4 acres. So there's not a great deal of that zoning, and there's been the concern about that land being used up by non-commercial uses, such as storm ponds. There are different types of storm facilities there, and they can range in size. But the concern there is that, you know, you have a fairly large half-acre storm pond that was proposed to take up your NC zone. Even though that's an allowed use in that zone, should we consider making that use a conditional use or even prohibiting it? So, something to think about. Similarly, there's been concern about residential use in the NC zone, but that was always part of the zoning code amendments to include in the next neighborhood corridor. I'll talk more about that. What we've proposed here on this slide is that parks, playgrounds, and play fields within the Park Place concept plan area would be conditional uses, and so would stormwater facilities. Now, we could tighten that language up to say what specific types of stormwater facilities would require conditional use, such as a pond, or we could attach some sort of size threshold associated with that to assure that no more than a certain amount of that NC is taken up by a storm pond. I think there's some consideration here that, you know, a storm facility that serves the development in that zone is probably okay and probably is going to be a requirement of the stormwater standards to try to use a low impact development technique first and infiltrate on site before sending the water downstream to a big detention pond. So that's one way to approach these uses to limit the amount and preserve that land for neighborhood commercial.
Would that item L need to be further defined to obtain clear and objective standards?
Yes, and I think what we would use as the basis is the stormwater and grading design manual and the definitions that are coming out of that, just for consistency's sake. It talks about stormwater planters, rain gardens, vegetated swales, and detention ponds. Those are the 4 types of stormwater facilities. So
maybe you should reference that document here at that.
Yeah,
as
I think
part
we
of
can.
Item 11.
We can do that. The other way to approach it is to list these as prohibited uses, and that is certainly clear and objective, but it doesn't allow for much flexibility as far as if it turns out that it makes sense to put a small part of a pond in there or something like that. You know, there's some discretion associated, there's a lot of discretion associated with conditional use process, but it's also a lot of process for somebody. Yeah.
So I think a lot of this is going to be predicated on topography and, you know, where your stormwater basins actually are in that area. And so if you have a bunch of commercially zoned areas that are at the bottom of the bowl, you're gonna have stormwater facilities instead of commercial development.
Yeah.
And so I would, at least, before we make any decisions up here, I'd wanna be able to suss that out and really figure out whether or not we're just painting ourselves into a corner of just allowing, de facto stormwater facilities in an area that's lower, or, without looking at topography, I would want to see stormwater maybe serving the commercial development, but not necessarily a quote-unquote regional stormwater facility serving all of the single-family dwellings in that area that could have been commercial, I guess. Those are my thoughts about that.
Point. Yep. Okay, yeah, we're going to talk to Josh Wheeler, Assistant City Engineer, about what he thinks about the area in terms of the right location for these regional ponds, and a consideration to, can we locate them in areas that are not commercial? Yeah.
What's the process for writing and updating the stormwater plan? Who does that and how often? And
usually it's part of a legislative amendment, like to renovate, update the stormwater master plan, and then it's part of that process.
So it goes through a public process, though?
Yes.
Okay. My concern is that with what I, lack of a better term, referential code, is that you're farming out those set of decisions to some different group of people at some point in the future.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So.
Yeah, that's a good concern. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Cool. All right, thank you.
Sure. After the prohibited uses section, we go into the dimensional standards. And here we are including a statement about non-regulatory incentive programs that the city offers for vertical housing. And that is unusual to include in the zoning code, but we wanted people to be aware of it because there is a vertical housing tax credit program. It could potentially be used in the Park Place concept plan area. That's controlled by the Economic Development Department, and ultimately the City Commission may make that decision to incentivize vertical housing in the NC zone, in the mixed-use zones above retail. It might not work in this particular zone because it's so small scale and it's isolated and it's dependent on a lot of development immediately adjacent to it, but it's a consideration, and we wanted people to be aware of it. So there's that piece. We included a revision to increase the maximum building height to 45 feet, whichever is, or 3 stories, whichever is less. Increasing the height limit to 45 feet might allow developers greater flexibility and incentivize first floor commercial while allowing residential use above, but the commission may feel that allowing 3 stories in this area is not in keeping with the zoning or the adjacent uses. Furthermore, the market may not be there to support significant multi-story mixed-use development, more of a 2-story area, lower density type neighborhood commercial may just be what the market allows. So this may be a not unnecessary revision. It's just similar to what we've allowed in Thimble Creek. The Second Amendment seen here is a maximum corner side setback of 5 feet for Park Place concept plan and Thimble Creek. Purpose of that is to maximize the amount of the footprint and interaction with the public street, and make the corner side facades of the buildings very accessible and attractive by pedestrians so that you activate that neighborhood commercial space, rather than having a big 30-foot corner side setback that's taken up by landscaping and parking, that kind of thing. We have a minimum required landscaping percentage of 20, but the revision that we're proposing would add greater specificity and allow more flexibility for innovative landscaping designs because it's a more constrained site. So this would allow you to count landscaping within a parking lot towards that 15%, planter boxes, eco or green roofs, or a paved courtyard provided that 25% of that courtyard was landscaped or had trees at a certain spacing. 1 tree for every 500 square feet of urban plaza. So you remember that we had some new definitions, including eco roofs, green roofs, plaza, and that kind of thing. So that's where these kind of definitions come into play here.
Pete, one question on that.
Yeah.
For landscape requirements, any consideration for those stormwater facilities, if they're vegetated, to go towards that 20%?
Oh, yeah.
Or 25%?
That seems perfectly fair, considering that they are going to be required in, I believe, once you disturb or redevelop or develop 5,000 square feet of impervious surfaces when the stormwater grading design standards kick in. So, yeah, and they're going to be subject to low impact development requirement.
Yeah.
As a first priority. So that's a great suggestion.
Just one more thing. If you land on specific roof types for housing, does that transcend to commercial development as well?
I'm sorry,
So are you going to have specific roof types for commercial development, or is that going to be more flexible?
Roof
types?
Roof types?
Yeah.
Oh,
So does that, I mean, the roof types that apply to housing, will they apply to commercial development?
no.
Okay, good.
No.
Pete, and then one more comment on the development standards here for the height. Just a comment, I mean, I would support the additional height in that area. If you're talking neighborhood commercial, you know, the 3 stories is going to give you a little bit more flexibility, and the 45 feet give you a decent floor-to-floor ratio. So I'd be a proponent of that.
You'd be supportive of that? Okay. Yeah.
Could an applicant make an argument if the eco roof decreases their, I know it doesn't technically decrease the impervious surface, but could they make that argument that their eco roof decreases their impervious surface so they don't have to do whatever they need to do when they get to a certain threshold?
Yeah, usually those are counted, you know, or credited towards your landscaping.
Okay.
Or reducing your impervious surface as long as they meet the standard that Public Works has adopted.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I'm sorry, just to interrupt, Commissioner Dole, I was just having a hard time hearing you. I don't know if it's the mics tonight, but so when you were talking about the maximum building height, you said, did you say that you were supportive of
I am.
what's in
Yeah,
there?
I think that's a good move. Giving, you know, a little bit more headroom for those developments is going to get you flexibility and maybe push some of that commercial with allowing the diversity of housing above. 2 stories over, you know, a commercial level will give you more flexibility in housing types.
Thank you, I appreciate it, thanks.
Yeah. Sorry, and I'll do better to lean into the mic.
So next we have the new section 1724-060, which is the additional standards for the Park Place concept plan area. This relocates some of the existing NC zone requirements, but it also adds a new civic use allowance as a permitted use. So within the NC zone, all the uses that are permitted in the mixed-use corridor zone are permitted, but could be subject to the limitations of this code section. So civic uses include nonprofit and private uses that will be very high activity areas. They could be art galleries, outdoor venues, health and fitness clubs, and various other types of uses here. The one thing about this section for specific to the Park Place concept plan is that in order to get a modification, you could not get a type 2 modification of this section. You would have to apply for a variance or master plan in order to modify it. So bear that in mind as we're working through these. So residential uses, so the NC zone already restricts residential use to 50% of the total building square footage on site, and a single commercial building is limited to 10,000 square feet. This section adds more detail. The intent of...
I'm sorry, Pete, your slide went backwards. Could we get the slide for the residential that you're talking about?
Sorry. Oh, I hadn't advanced it.
You clicked and then it went back, so no worries.
Thanks, appreciate it. Section 2, it states all ground floor residential uses except for the entrances to upper story residential uses shall be set back a minimum of 100 feet, from the property line along Livesey Main Street. And Section 3 states ground floor residential buildings square footage shall not exceed 50% of the ground floor non-residential buildings square footage on site. So the intent of those is to allow some ground floor residential use behind commercial space, so as to assure that the small scale commercial spaces have priority and face the street. There's been some discussion here amongst the commissioners about whether you wish to tighten up the limitations on commercial use, residential uses within this zone. When the zone district was originally adopted, it always had that 50% cap in there as an upper limit to how much residential you could construct in that zone. I think our thinking was that the first thing that somebody's going to build out there is going to be residential. And if it was nothing, if we didn't have a 50% cap on that, we would never see any commercial. But there's also a market aspect to this too. So.
Sorry, Pete, is there a specific language that specifies facing the commercial area that needs to face the street in here?
Yeah, that is in 1762-055, which would still apply. These are just in addition to that. Yeah. So.
So this is changing. Just want to make sure I put this into non-technical words. So.
Yeah.
Upper floors are allowed to be residential use with no percentage limitation, cap requirement, anything.
Correct.
Ground floor, if I'm reading this correctly, basically up to a third of that can be residential, while the other 2/3 could be commercial. Because it's 50% of the commercial, so the commercial would be 2 parts and the residential would be half of those 2 parts, which would be the third part.
On the first floor.
On the first floor?
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Throughout the thought of allowing live-work dwellings to be considered as commercial, just a thought.
Yeah, I think we need to be clear about the live-work because it is permitted in the zone, and it does allow ground floor residential use as a component, as necessary for that live-work, so.
Well, but what I'm saying is the live-work is by definition a hybrid of the commercial and the residential.
Yeah.
So are we making that only count for the residential side, or would we allow that to count for the commercial side?
That's a really good question. Would we count all of the live-work as commercial space? Because it's its own use category, essentially?
I guess I was thinking of it as kind of separate from, like, if there was a live-work unit, we wouldn't be looking at that 50% residential. So we probably need to clarify this because this is just what I was envisioning, is that 50% would apply more to like a mixed-use building where the residential and commercial aren't necessarily connected as one entity. You know, maybe they're same landlord, but they're not tied in any way. And the live-work units are typically, you know, the idea is the person who has the business lives there, kind of a thing. So, to me, they were separate, so maybe we need to just go back and kind of clarify
Yeah,
that.
to me, they were separate too, and I need to go back and look at what the live-work section says about the residential component, because it may not be an issue, it may just be fine, but, okay, we'll take note.
Does that help answer your question a little bit?
I'm
or-
just wondering, because so basically, number 3 sets, you know, there's two categories, residential and commercial, but live work is both, right? I mean, it's an in-between, it's a gray area, it's a fence straddle, or however you want to say it. So are we going to count the square footage of a live work unit as commercial or residential? So that, and I'll throw out, there's in Fairview, in Multnomah County, there's a section of live work units, and I've been in those at work for various reasons, and there's kind of, you know, there's a front couple hundred square feet that are intended to be the professional space, so to speak, and then it's connected to the 2 bedrooms and the upstairs that have the residential space. So are you going to be designating a percentage or a certain square footage of that whole unit together as commercial and the other portion is residential, or are we counting as the whole thing because there's no requirement to use that front space as commercial? And there's no really requirement, as far as I know, that you can't make the commercial go farther back beyond that front space that's sort of architecturally designed to be the work unit.
Yeah.
And I'm totally in favor of live work units. I just want to know where they fit. You know,
Yeah,
I want to know
exactly.
what bucket that
Yeah.
square footage goes into.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we may need an additional section. Once I go back and look at 1720-040 and then come back with a more informed revision.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So what I'm reading here, number 1 spells out that residential uses are permitted but shall not exceed 50% of the total building square footage. And then number 4 says upper story residential uses are permitted. So if the upper floor is residential and it's a 2-story building, for example, that would mean that
On
the
ground
bottom
floor.
level could have no residential.
Correct.
And what if the person upstairs decides to, so if somebody downstairs has residential, the upstairs couldn't, I guess it would depend on what the use is of each resident.
If the downstairs was residential, it'd have to be at least 100 feet off of the public road, you know, and they would have to push that portion of the building back.
Yeah.
So,
Because if there was residential on the ground floor, then you could not have residential on the upper floor for that building. Because they've already used
if they've already
some
used
of
up
it.
their limit.
Well, other way around. If you had the second level as residential, there would be no room for residential on the ground floor anymore.
But
because
if
you've already
somebody
used it.
had a live-work unit on the bottom,
Right.
then you could no longer have residential upstairs because some of the building was used for residential. And having residential upstairs would be over 50%. It doesn't work.
Yeah, I understand where you're going with that, and now that makes Chair Stoll's question a little more clear, okay, so we'll have to, so the live-work units that I'm picturing that I have seen were just that, like long, you know, rectangle, office on the bottom, living on top, there's no other.
It couldn't be 2 different units. You couldn't have 1 unit upstairs separately rented from the downstairs.
No,
It'd have to
I
be
don't.
1 2-story unit.
I don't think so. And so that's what we probably need to put some clarity around, is that in my mind, there's a building that's either mixed use, meaning there's some commercial on the bottom floor, and we're trying to only have commercial on the main street of the bottom floor to create that interaction and kind of walkable urban activity.
Yeah.
separate, in a different building, maybe next door, there's a live-work unit. So there's office, artist studio, whatever it may be, with their one residential unit on top. And maybe that's connected to another live-work unit. But, so I think maybe, is that getting at kind of how you're seeing all this combined? Because I guess in my mind, they weren't combining.
So to clarify the concern, there needs to be some component of the living part of a live-work dwelling which is potentially affected by this limitation, and also takes away the potential for additional residential space on the upper floor. So we'll look at that.
So
Yeah.
I think we should just get rid of number one. I think
Get
that
number one.
based on our conversations last time, because if you have a 3-floor building, I think probably the most reasonable use for most people would be commercial on the ground floor, or a mix of commercial and residential, or live work, and then residential on the second and third floor. 50%, if you get to the third floor, half of one of those upper floors has to be commercial. And then we don't get that 2 levels of residential over the street fronting commercial. And also, if you're gonna make the commercial front the street, that further cuts that ground floor square footage theoretically down to where, you know, half or roughly has to face it. So I think getting rid of number one and getting rid of that umbrella 50% total building square footage area is the right thing to do. Offer that up to everyone else for discussion, but
That makes sense.
I think we're kind of hamstringing everything that goes beyond that by keeping number one in place.
I gotcha.
Could we have a limitation that's more like 75%, so that if it's, or it's in, I think this is what you were getting at earlier, if it's in thirds, if you've got 3 stories, the ground floor has to be commercial, and then you can have the upper 2, which would push it over the 50%. I am a bit reluctant to have no limitation, because I believe that the land will get used up for residential much more quickly than it would for commercial. But.
Well, which one have we identified as being in need?
I'm sorry?
Which one have we identified as being in need in the greater community, residential or more commercial space? I mean, honestly, if we're talking about housing needs, you know, and I mean, if anyone's had a chance to read at least the executive summary on this. What's that?
I also just want to go back to what was in
Discuss
the
it.
concept plan.
Yeah, no, I get that. I would get rid of the 50% and then leave number 3 as governing that ground floor, where it's making essentially a 1/3 cap on residential. And so it could be full commercial, or it could be up to as little as 2/3 commercial.
Maybe we could have specific formulas for the different floors. If it's a 3-floor and the bottom is half residential, then that would be 16.66% residential, commercial. And if it was a 2-story, then you could have a maximum of 25% work. So it's different for a different number of floors. 2-story building could have 25% work, 75% residential. 3-story could have 16.66% work, and whatever's left over from 100 would be the amount of residential you could have, which is 100 minus 16.667. 83.33, is that right?
I like the original idea.
So those are the formulas we need, yeah.
But tell me I'm wrong. Do it. You said you disagree. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I didn't say that you were wrong. I just didn't, you know, at the first reading of this, I just don't think that, I'd want to look at this a little bit more before I really supported what the site analysis and the economic study had for justifying commercial or not in that area.
Okay?
I have a question on item 2, the 100 feet setback. Can you clarify to me how that would work?
Example here is the property on the, it's about 200 feet deep off of Livesey Road. And so there's some space there. There's design standards to pull the buildings up to the front. Those are elsewhere in the code, you know, they're the mixed use and commercial design standards. So we're gonna have buildings very close to Livesey. But the purpose of requiring a 100-foot setback for residential on the ground floor is to make sure that space on the front of the site is preserved for commercial use. Yeah. So it's essentially a setback, and it could be a detached structure even, it could be an attached building, but the portion of that site that is used for residential is 100 feet further back. Yeah. Okay, so now we're into the design standards section of the code, site design section. First part of this is 1, siting of structures, 2, parking, and 3, building facades and entrances. The purpose of these revisions is to define and implement the Main Street concept, where you have a fairly solid row of buildings to form a main street and make it a much more walkable and vibrant commercial area. We heard some public testimony about the need for these additional standards. And the various building and architectural features and pedestrian design elements are presented as a more prescriptive set of requirements here. These proposed standards are expressly not subject to modification, as I mentioned earlier. You would need a type 3 variance or a master plan adjustment to vary from these requirements. So the siting of structures standard is similar to what is elsewhere in the code for Thimble Creek, and also for our site plan and design review chapter. At least 60% of the site must be occupied by buildings within 5 feet of the property line. And if you have less than 100 feet of street frontage, it's a 50% requirement. And parking must be located to the rear of the structure or below the structure, so there would not be an allowance for parking to the side. This is also intended to maximize the amount of that limited NC zone. You are still allowed to get credit if there's a requirement for minimum amount of parking for your particular use. The current parking code allows you to get credit for any available public on-street parking, and that is referenced in Chapter 1752. And then the building facade and entrance piece requires that the most significant front facade of your building face the main street and have the functional primary building entrance face the street. That's a pretty common design standard for mixed use. Has to be clearly defined and recessed or framed by a sheltering element, such as an awning, arcade, or portico, in order to provide shelter. And goes on further to talk about the pedestrian elements that are required here. This is a menu of design elements intended to encourage people to linger in the area and sorry, a minimum of 3 of these elements are required. Canopies or overhangs with a 5-foot minimum depth, transom windows at least 60% of the facade width, storefront friezes, horizontal elements above the transom window or at the mezzanine level, window planter boxes, minimum of 1 per window, projected window sill at least 2 inches from the building wall plane and 12 to 24 inches above grade, or plaza, courtyard, square, or other extra wide sidewalk next to the building entrance with a minimum width of 6 feet. Going on with further elements, sitting spaces which specify a sitting height, minimum of 16 inches in height and 30 inches in width, and located within 30 feet of the street frontage. So that is just an area for people to sit and be and enjoy that. Public art that incorporates seating, such as a fountain or sculpture. Enhanced landscape treatments, such as arbors, low walls, trellises, and similar elements, or enhanced architectural details, such as tile and moldings. So those are all options, and they would need to provide at least 3 of those within that space. Do we have any questions about these ones? Okay.
Pete, a couple comments, just focusing on some of the specifics here. On 4A, the canopies, am I reading that right? Canopies or overhangs for the entire width of the building? Meaning like the entire face or entire length of the facade of the building?
Okay.
That's
what it says.
I would say the suggestion might be to, pull back on that.
We might want to loosen up a little bit on
Yeah, that one seems a little tight. And then the other one, in terms of seating space,
yeah,
it might be worth mentioning like accessible requirements. You've got the height and the length, but there's some other ADA requirements that you might consider in there mimicking, just if you're going to, provide that as an option.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So include some.
Yeah, when you look at the accessibility standards, there's some clear floor areas and there's some language on the back support. I'm just thinking out loud, like if you're gonna provide that as public seating.
Is that something you would want to include in that section, or is its own?
I think you could either say accessible or give the specifics, and you can.
Okay.
Like I'm thinking of like in our building code requirements for benches and locker rooms, and some of the seating requirements.
Okay.
You might look at that.
Okay. Yeah.
And then on public art, love the idea of incorporating seating, but I push the art over the seating. Choice, right? Like.
Okay, so public art doesn't necessarily have to incorporate seating. Good point. We already got a seating option.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, let's take 6 minutes. 9:10. Back at 9:10.
Okay, I don't have many more slides. We have 3 more slides on the master plan, and 3 slides to just cover the basics of this report.
Recording stopped.
So, let's see. Final section on neighborhood commercial is there it goes. The corner building entrance standards. So these are applicable within the first 50 feet of depth of property in the NC zone if a building is located at the intersection of 2 streets. They are intended to provide, again, more attractive spaces for pedestrians to linger and activate the space between the buildings and the street. The principal entry standards, at least one of these standards must be met. You either locate the primary entrance within 25 feet of the corner of the building, or you incorporate certain architectural elements such as increased building height or massing, or features at the corner of the building or within 25 feet of the corner of the building, or you chamfer, which means to cut at a 45-degree angle, the corner of the building and include sheltering elements or different materials there off of this list of choices. So that's a similar standard to what we have in site plan and design review in chapter 1762. In this case, it's going to be fairly prescriptive and not subject to a modification. Okay. And on to the master plan and plan unit development chapter. So by definition, this is the discretionary review option chapter. There's a lot of red lines on this first purpose intent statement. I'm not going to go into what they mean, but we just reorganized that purpose statement to better capture the intent of the code, which is to offer a more flexible and discretionary review process for various types of development. This is an option for any applicant, provided that we also adopted a clear and objective process and standards. So there's no new standards written in this section, just clarifying the language. Within the actual criteria, none of the criteria are changing, but we are referencing updated chapters of the code that may apply to a general development plan and a detailed development plan. So the general development plan is the very first review. It's not typically a site-specific plan, so when we're writing findings for that, we often reference these code sections, even though we haven't gotten to the detailed development plan section yet. And we would be writing conditions of approval to comply with these sections with the DDP. They're just listed here for clarity, and the same section of revisions are repeated under the detailed development plan section as well. In this section, prior code section made general references to Goal 5 resources, natural, historical, cultural resources, and overlay districts. Here we're listing out what those overlay districts are, which implement those Goal 5 resources. So that's 1740, 1742, 1744, 1748, and 1749. And those are also repeated under the detailed development plan section as well. And that's all the revisions that are proposed to the master plan.
Pete, I think there was one more that we didn't put a slide together.
Uh-oh.
And that, sorry, that missed that one. So under the applicability section, so 1765-030, we've got applicability of the master plan or planned unit development regulations. And a section was added for clarity's sake that basically states that the master plan and planned unit development review is a discretionary tract, and that we have adopted separate clear and objective approval standards. So we just made it even more clear in the applicability section that if there's an applicant who chooses not to or cannot or for whatever reason doesn't go the clear and objective route, then this master plan is applicable to that development.
Thank you. Yeah. And final thing we have tonight, we've handed out copies of the Johnson Economics LLC report. Jerry Johnson wrote the market assessment for the Park Place Concept Plan 2008. It's been a long time and it needed some revisions, so we asked him to write a separate report that deals just with the North Village. And so it includes a site analysis, subject site, the regional context, so he's looking at the market area within a 2-mile radius of the North Village, and the demographics, household income within that market area, the commercial market trends that they're seeing regionally, and whether the market supports commercial development in this area. We also asked them to give their opinion about the impact of the design standards that we're drafting from a general perspective. So a few takeaways from that report. Concept plan would add roughly 1,800 households in the immediate area, although it may take 10 to 15 years to realize this growth. Retail vacancies are rising sharply. I think they said they're about 10% right now. Residential density and buying power of the area is limited. Much of the retail demand generated within the market area will be met by supply outside the market area. So they're talking about when people are shopping, they want to do multiple stops in one place, groceries, clothing, etc. He refers to that as convenient cross-shopping. So they're going to be looking for a more centrally located retail center. Supporting land uses that are likely in this area are going to be service-oriented as opposed to more retail. And that's a trend that you're seeing market-wide. And that would be small clinics, fitness, real estate, accounting, hair, nail, spa. You know, there is some talk about coffee shop or cafe and what it would take to support something like that in this area. And those types of uses, particularly coffee shops and cafes, are dependent to a pretty significant extent on vehicle trips. So he talks about access to the site and visibility of the site as it sits right now and what it would need in terms of making the connection between Holcomb and Redland in order for it to be more viable. So the Holly Lane connection in particular was a necessary component of that. There's a lot more in the report if you want to dive into it, but that's just some of the takeaways. And this outlook could change if, you know, if the pace of development changed out there. But that's just his take on it. As far as the design standards, I'll go into this in more detail at the next meeting, but he's looked at these 5 things: maximum building footprint of 10,000 square feet, the prohibitions on drive-throughs and gas stations, minimum building height, minimum FAR, and the requirements for parking to be located to the rear of the site or the side. So he's speaking very generally about these types of design standards and the effect that they would typically have on a commercial tenant's willingness to locate in an area like this. So that's my overview of the report, and we'll talk in more detail about it later. Thank you. That's the end of it.
All right, thank you. Any questions or other discussion? about that? No? Should I say out loud what I told you? Sure. Okay. So I'm just gonna, this is kind of where I come from with all this commercial stuff, and especially if we're gonna
Recording in progress.
if we're gonna do, the commercial requirements, and if there's, mixed housing types and lower income things, I think it's important to keep a perspective that everyone in this room is middle class and above, and we have different shopping habits than a lot of the people that are gonna be living here. The less money you make, or the less money you have, and if it's low income, by definition, those folks have less money than middle class and up folks, they're gonna be less inclined to, they're going to be more inclined to visit things that are close to them for their basic needs, but those businesses are gonna have much tighter margins, and they're gonna have a harder time staying in business. Most of my job is working with folks on the lower third of the socioeconomic world, and there's a reason that those neighborhoods don't have a lot of businesses and a lot of services and things, and it's because those folks just don't have enough money to give to those businesses to support them. And so I think it's important when we go through this to think that it's not just us and more wealthier people. You got to think about the lower end of the income level, because that's going to be a portion going forward because of these diversity requirements. That's going to be a significant portion of the population, and you can't really count on those households to be spending a lot of money on those sorts of things. So I'll say the quiet part out loud. I'm sorry if it's offensive. It's uncomfortable, and it just is. Yeah, that's where I'm coming from on that.
So I guess to the counter on that, I respect what the report says, and I do have concerns about declining retail space availability. And to me, in my mind, there's two types of retail space availability. There is the kind of the shopping mall, larger CBD style retail space, and then there's small neighborhood retail spaces that maybe you might typically see in some of the smaller neighborhoods in Portland that are actually being well served. Again, those are, I agree with Greg's comments about the socioeconomic stratum of some fancy neighborhood in Portland versus maybe somebody that's going to be here. But at the same time, I think what the economic study lacks is it's talking about real-time scenarios instead of looking in more of a visionary way in terms of what this will look like in the future. And I just would hate to miss the opportunity of earmarking some of these areas for commercial development if, economics were to change, and there would be more of an opportunity for using these commercial spaces. So that's, I guess maybe those are my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough, and I want to look at this a little bit more. I just kind of skimmed it while we're talking about other things, but those are just my initial thoughts on that.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
All right.
I'll add something to that.
Go for it.
Sorry about that. It's hard to read. My vision's going bad, but it says that the overall vacancy rate has been rising significantly in the last half of 2023 and 24 year, despite a lack of new construction. So retail is just going down, and it's not just because of the lack of retail construction. Retail is just going down. So forcing developers to build a bunch of retail space that will likely not be filled doesn't seem to positively serve the community like I think we have the ability to do. So I'll have to agree with Greg a little more.
Well, I don't think that this plan forces the developer to build the retail spaces. I think it just reserves that space to be available for building.
50-50, that's gotta go.
Oh, yeah.
The other piece I want to add to that is the economic impact of because regardless of the economic stratum or the ability to serve these businesses, they're going to have to go somewhere to get some of these services. And they're going to have to get on a roadway that's not well-served to do that. So I think that this report, and that report doesn't really even talk about that. And I think that's a really big economic factor in someone's ability to be able to maybe walk to the cleaners or go get a cell phone or maybe get a piece of pizza somewhere, you know, in their neighborhood, as opposed to jumping in the car and driving somewhere to do that same thing. And so that would be something I would want to see. There's just something about, I guess, the walkable community that I can't let go of, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, the plan talks about.
And this is a really far-flung part of the universe, you know, in Oregon City, and it's served by one single roadway right now. And so, you know, if you can reduce some of the trips by providing some commercial development, I mean, I don't have any figures to back that up. I am just, you know, winging it here, but it would make sense. It would think, you think that would, you know, better serve the area if you did have a few commercial uses there.
Yeah, I mean, the concept plan talks about a quarter-mile walkable radius for each of the villages, and it has graphics that illustrate that. And, you know, they're trying to, they didn't specify when this would happen. They talked about at some point when this community is built out, there needs to be some level of neighborhood amenity so that people can get some of their needs served locally.
Right, and to say that those things don't exist, I don't think is enough rationale for not doing it. I think you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater by saying, oh, because we don't have a second roadway to serve those areas, we shouldn't do it at all. Because maybe one day there will be a roadway that serves those areas, and then once those areas are all developed with houses, you're not going to have any opportunity to do it. And we're going to look back and say, gee, I wish we would have had some sort of mechanism by which those commercial areas became viable once it was better served with roadways or whatever, whatever that area would need to work.
I agree with Commissioner Espy on the fact that we are looking at a different type of commercial area. I mean, when you look at the commercial areas that have been developed with high rent, they're vacant, you know, like Lake Oswego, Westland, we're talking about something affordable. People are having less kids. So if they're going to actually start a little business on a lower level that's accessible and they're not planning on having kids, and it can actually be something they can live into possibly, long term, it may be a good investment for someone. And then it is the walkability. I mean, long term, that's what we're looking at. If there's a bottleneck with traffic and we're going green, I mean, it is something to think about. And it's something different than what we've looked at before. You know, it's going to be a smaller space and it's going to be retail in a smaller area. And there is an option really to still have it dwelling, right? And not have it necessarily commercial right away. And it can convert, so why not? It may make it even more valuable to sell, so, you know, long term, so.
Thank you.
Well, anyway, much stuff to think about for next meeting, in regards to this report. Yeah. All right, anything else on that? Anyone else? No? Okay, we'll move on to communications.
Let's see, so I guess for communications, our next meeting will be July 8th, and so we will, we'll put this report in the packet so you'll have time to actually read through it, digest it, and then we can bring that back in conjunction with the some of the revisions to the neighborhood commercial section, I think. We have a short period of time to turn around the next packet, so I don't want to overpromise what we can deliver, but we can, adding this to the next agenda packet's not an that's something we can accomplish. But the other piece is that we'll just continue with more discussions on the Park Place Code for whatever is ready, and we're just going to keep moving through it until we're done.
Cool. And we have I thought I saw, we have a quasi judicial hearing, the second meeting in July, is that?
Yeah, that sounds correct.
I already forgot what it was, but I remember seeing the date.
Actually, that's not, okay, it may be quasi judicial, because it's one property, it's an annexation and a zone change.
Yeah, that's, okay, that's right. Well, we have a hearing anyway, we have an application.
There will
yeah,
be
that's
a
right.
public hearing,
Yeah,
the second
okay.
meeting in July,
Okay.
yes. This hopefully won't affect you all, but we have a new agenda management system. And we've been practicing with it, testing it out. But this next meeting packet in July 8th will be our first time around. And so fingers crossed, all goes smoothly and it's somewhere on the web and you can find it. So if it's a little clunky, I mean, if you're having a hard time, please reach out, let us know, because it will be, the first, I think it's actually the first meeting in the whole city that's going to be using this packet. So, but, lucky us, we get to go first. So.
I'm sorry, we're implementing a new record-keeping system July 1st at work as well, and I can't do both, so you guys are going to have to.
All right, I'll let the city know. Chair Stoll says put it on hold.
All right.
It's fine with me.
Will it still have clickable links and things where we can go to individual?
It should.
Don't know yet. Okay.
It should, theoretically.
And I'll second that suggestion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Any other communications from anybody? No? All right. Thank you. We're adjourned.